Hello and welcome everyone to today's Escher webinar, and welcome to 2021 if you didn't join us in our first food processor webinar earlier in the month. My name is Chris and I will be joined by my colleague Alicia today. We had a lot of webinars on new features that we were adding last year. So we thought we would start off this year with a series of webinars just covering sort of the Genesis R&D Foods Essentials. So there'll be a series of webinars covering different topics. We hope this will provide you helpful instruction on the fundamental uses of Genesis and just general considerations that you'll want to keep in mind when working with the software. This can be helpful to you and or your team. And as usual, we'll make webinar a recording and make it available on our website for make it easy to find and easy to share. And we'll also email that out to all the attendees, I believe, as well. Before we get into the main topic, let me give you just a brief background on Escher Research. We were established in 1981 and have grown from offering one of the first nutrition and food labeling software solutions to now a full series or suite of products and services that include Genesis R&D Foods, Genesis R&D Supplements, Food Processor for dietary analysis, and we have consulting services that provides labeling services, formulation review, and expertise for customized projects. Genesis R&D software specifically was introduced in 1991 to help address the need for convenient formulation analysis and formatting of the NLEA food labels for US regulations. Over the years, Genesis has remained the gold standard for product development, recipe analysis, and nutrition facts creation, as well as we've added restaurant menu analysis and reporting. We offer label modules to prepare compliant labels for the US, Canada, Mexico, and the EU. Today we'll be demonstrating Genesis Foods version 11.9. If you have any questions about your licensing or account, please contact our Escher sales team and they can help you. Their email address is just sales@escher.com. As I mentioned, this is a first in a series of webinars designed to cover some of the basic functions and present core understandings that you'll want to have about Genesis. Continuing this series, in February we'll be covering recipes, March will be ingredient statements, and in April we'll talk about allergens. We routinely, I can't say that word today, send out notifications on upcoming topics. We'll also provide you previous recorded webinars on the Escher website in the events tab. As always, this webinar will be recorded and you'll receive a link and recording as well as the slide deck following the webinar. Please note, if you have any questions, send those right away via the GoToWebinar control panel. Don't wait till the end of the webinar. Feel free to post your questions. We have people available to answer those questions. We can't get to all the questions, or some may require further investigation or information. So if we don't get back to you during the webinar, we'll follow up with you directly. Today we'll show you a few search tips, how to enter a new ingredient with considerations for naming nutrients, groups, and other points, as well as the check data, nutrient calculator, and audit trail. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Alicia.
Thank you so much, Chris. So yes, we're just talking about ingredients today, but there's really a lot to cover. So I'll mostly be working with the Genesis software but I did want to provide you with a few more slides so you have some additional notes on what we're covering today. So the notes you'll have with these slides include the nutrients to consider when you're entering ingredients, the nutrients to view function in Genesis, the nutrient calculator tool, some considerations on specific nutrients. I'll show you the ingredient spec sheet report, and I'll touch upon some exporting options. And may I offer you a reminder that the care and the accuracy that you apply when entering ingredients in Genesis carries forward to your recipes. So we consistently encourage you to use the spreadsheet report when you get to your recipes and use that as yet another way to check that you've entered your ingredient information correctly, that the data is complete, and that the data makes sense for the purposes that you need. So now let me switch over to Genesis, and I'll just show you, more of the features that are available and what we want to consider when we're working with the software. When you open up the software, you'll see this main screen here. And again, we're working in version 11.9 today. If you do need to check the version that you have, click on the About button here, and that will tell you what version you're running. For cloud users, we keep you up to date, so you're always running in the current version if your subscription is current. And for desktop installations, go ahead and click on that button. If you don't have the current version running, then again, contact our sales team at sales@escher.com. I'll discuss a few more search techniques in just a few minutes. And we have more information like blogs and other webinars that we've prepared on searching specifically. But when you do open the software, like I said, you have this main screen here. And to get started with adding ingredients, what you might do first is search the software to see if it contains your suppliers already. So you can go to the Open Ingredient option and then just type in your supplier name and see if anything comes up. You'll have a few points of information that you see on this search results screen. One is you'll see the count of the total items that matched the search term that you entered. And then we have the item name, some coded information, and product and supplier columns. In Genesis, for product, we refer to the brand name. And then the supplier means the supplier, the manufacturer, or the larger entity or organization that is providing the information that you see. So for national databases, you might see USDA or Health Canada in the supplier column. I'll try another supplier just to see what shows up. And here, you may see a limit indicator if your search results are greater than the default limit indicator set with Genesis. It's set at 400 items, and you may or may not want to see that limit. So let me show you very quickly how to turn that off. So from, again, this main screen in Genesis, if you go to My Preferences, and in this general section, there is a search limit count. So you could choose to increase or decrease that limiter, or if you don't want to see a limitation at all, just set it to 0. And then you'll see all of the search results that match what you've entered. And just a note on My Preferences, that is just that, my preferences, not your preferences. So each user can set their preferences as they want. There's a lot of like decimal places and this search limiter, many other search or settings that you can select. So if you have multiple users within your organization, each of you can set your own My Preferences. So going back to searching, I type in a supplier name and nothing shows up. So that's an indication that I need to enter the ingredients that I use from my supplier. So what I would do is contact my supplier, obtain the current data sheets, and then I can add the new ingredients. So to add ingredients to Genesis, you can either go to File, New, or just click on the New button and choose Ingredient. This is the ingredient information screen. This is essentially a form, so you just want to fill this out as completely as possible. So we'll start by naming this ingredient. I'm just going to type in an example here. And this might be a name that would be similar to the convention that we use for the Escher database ingredients. So again, those are the items that ship with the software. There's a certain order to the words and phrases in the names, and we follow a specific convention. So just keep in mind when you're working with Genesis, you want to use consistency when naming your ingredients. So whether you are the only person using the software or at your organization, or if there's a group of you that all need to be entering ingredients, you want to all use the same logical and consistent manner to apply the names. And let me just switch back to the slides, and I'll just tell you a bit more about considerations for your naming. Like I mentioned, you may want to list ingredient names from general food type to specific detail, like I showed with my example. So I had the food type, a flavor, the preparation method, and even a product code included in my name. Uppercase versus lowercase is entirely up to your preference or your organization's preference. So you just want to be consistent with that. If you have ingredients or recipes intended for a specific region, a region code might be appropriate in your name if that's going to help you search and find the ingredients that you need. If you use a numbering system as part of the name, use at least 2 digits to maintain the numeric order. So use 01, 02, 03 rather than 1, 2, 3. And for dates, for best practice, if you include dates in the name, consider beginning the dates with the year format. So start with the year 2021 or whatever, and then followed by the month or the month and the day or quarter. Again, it just helps sort and filter items in a logical manner. And you can also use the user code field in Genesis to help identify a specific ingredient. The user code must be unique for each food or ingredient, so just keep that in mind. So I'll jump back into Genesis. I'm going to use just a slightly different name, very generic, but just for these purposes. And I'll put in a code. So the quantity and measures fields here are populated based on the nutritional information that you receive from your supplier. So whatever amount the nutritional information is reported in by your supplier, that relates to these fields. And we often see that in 100-gram data. So if so, you would enter that there. If the supplier provides you with the serving weight, the weight of the serving size, then perhaps that might be the amount that you're entering here. The default is set to grams. And just know that additional weights are available with this drop-down menu, but it is a weight amount that you're needing to fill in for the quantity and measure here. And with Genesis, keeping in mind, if you use ounce weight, note that Genesis uses the regular ounce weight equivalent of 1 ounce equals 28.35 grams. So keep that in mind. And then if you are working with liquids, you still need to enter a weight here. So however you obtain the weight of your liquid ingredient, whether that's weighing it physically, or if you have volume to weight information from your supplier or density information, this field here must be a weight set of data. We have the common name, and that's typically used if you want to include a shorter or friendlier name. It will appear on some of the reports, and so just again keeping that in mind, it is an optional field, but if you want a slightly friendlier name than what you might assign to the ingredient itself, use the common name field. And then this is the user code field that I mentioned. So again, that's a unique code for each food, and it can be anything, alpha, numeric, whatever is meaningful to you. It just needs to be unique for each ingredient that you're using. So I'll just type in that as my user code. Then we have the product and supplier fields, and these are populated from a drop-down list. So click on the list to see what is available. Again, product we refer to as the brand. Supplier would be that larger entity that's providing the information. Sometimes these might be the same, sometimes they are different names. If you don't find what you're looking for, this list is populated by the items that are included in the Escher database. Again, those foods that ship with the software. If you don't see what you need here, then just choose new, and you can assign a new supplier or a product name. And with this list, you'll see that those accompanying the software for the Escher products appear in black text, and then those that you've added will appear in blue. So that's just another way of helping keep those straight, which ones that you've added versus which come with the software. Then we move on to the Nutrients tab, and we're going to spend a little time here. So this is where you fill in as much nutrient data as you have for the ingredient. And a few things to consider when working with the nutritional information: you might have supplier ingredient data reporting values per 100 gram or per serving, like I mentioned, and it might be unrounded data, or it might be rounded label data. So you do want to consider which works best for your formula and which provides the greatest accuracy. So if you have label rounded data from a supplier, but it might be best to really work in unrounded values to give you better accuracy, push back to your supplier. Sometimes spec sheets will report both the 100 gram data that's unrounded and serving size information that's the label rounded. In that case, you may want to choose the 100 gram unrounded data just for greater accuracy. But again, contact your supplier if you need any clarification or additional information for your ingredients. And also remember that even ingredients that occur minimally in a formula, like spices or additives, little amounts can add up as you are adding those ingredients to your formula. So the more detailed data you can get for those is best. If you only have per serving information, like a spice that comes in a 1/4 teaspoon serving size, a lot of the values reported might be rounded as 0 if it's rounded data. So again, just be aware of the amount of detail that's best for your finished product formula. And when entering in the ingredients, you want to watch for missing data and consider if it makes sense. So when a supplier reports a nutrient value of 0, we would expect that to indicate the ingredient contains none of that ingredient. And we would enter 0 for the nutrient field. But if nutrient values are missing, we can't assume that that indicates 0. So again, that would be another reason to contact a supplier if you have nutrient values, especially for mandatory label nutrients that you're working with. If those are blanks, you want clarification on those, and you want to populate those with filled in data. And as we're still experiencing the transition to newer label formats in the US and in Canada, and now we have updated regulations for Mexico, we need to be sure that the data for each ingredient supports the final nutrition label. So you want to be mindful of units used to report the nutrients, and look to see that the units on your data sheet or your spec sheet match the units used in Genesis. So if the spec sheet is reporting vitamin D in IUs, you just want to be mindful that a US label would report vitamin D in micrograms. So consider conversions that might be necessary, or if you're needing to go from grams to milligrams to micrograms, depending on how the spec sheet reports the data, be mindful of conversions there. Another just one detail that if you're working with spec sheets or data sheets from countries outside of your own or outside of what you typically label in, be knowledgeable of the definitions used for a nutrient from one country to another. For example, in the US, we report total carbohydrates for the label value for carbohydrates, where other countries might report available carbohydrates for their carbohydrates field on the label. So again, this is essentially a form. So I'm just going to fill in my nutrient values and work my way down this list. And with your supplier spec sheets, you might have more decimal precision. Sometimes we see it out to like 6 decimal places, and you just want to consider what's going to work best for you and your organization. But if you have more decimal precision than what I'm entering here, certainly add as much as you can. So here I've filled in my ingredient nutrient data. I have selected here a fairly small set of nutrients. I have the US mandatory label set. So that's the current US labeling set of mandatory nutrients. You may certainly have more from your supplier. So fill in as much information as you can. regarding the nutrient detail. You might notice that some of the nutrients on the screen here show a %DV value while others do not. So things like trans fatty acid for US labeling, we don't have a recommended you should eat this much trans fat. It's really based on limiting that. So there's no recommended trans fatty acid value and therefore no %DV that is reported on label. But then you may have also noticed I can enter %DV in Genesis. So I entered 14% for calcium, 20% for iron, and then Genesis will calculate a conversion for me. You can enter either, the quantitative value or the %DV, but if your supplier does provide you with both quantitative value and the %DV, it's best practice to enter the quantitative amount and then let Genesis calculate a %DV for you. One other way, if I do have more nutrients provided from my supplier to enter additional nutrients here, a quick way is to just check the Show All Nutrients box. And this opens up or displays all of the nutrients and components that Genesis includes, as well as if you've added any nutrients to your software, those will show up in this listing. And then I could choose to populate more information from this screen. So with working with the nutrient data here, you may want to use the nutrient calculator to fill in more blanks if needed. This is available in a couple ways in Genesis. We can auto-calculate, choose auto-calculations, or manually select calculate nutrients at the end. So just depending on what works for your workflow, if you don't want to be interrupted, then you can uncheck the auto calculations box and maybe choose to calculate the available nutrients once you've entered all the data that you have. Otherwise, with the auto calculations selection, as you populate these fields, you will be prompted with a, do you wish to calculate this nutrient field as well, based on the data that you've entered for a certain nutrient field. For some nutrients like vitamin D, there is a straight calculation. So if you enter an IU value, Genesis knows what conversion unit to get you to the micrograms. For other nutrients like vitamin A and vitamin E, there is a prompt for the source of the particular nutrient. So vitamin A, it will ask you, is it a plant or animal source? For vitamin E, is it naturally occurring or synthetic? So you may have a few additional decisions or selections to make along the way when you're working with the calculations. So again, I've entered in my data and I'm going to choose the Calculate Nutrients button as a manual selection rather than being automatically prompted. And here I want to populate my available carbohydrates. I mentioned that Mexico and EU uses available carbohydrates rather than the total carbohydrates field for carbohydrates on their labels. So when I check the box, you'll also notice that Genesis gives you the formula that is used. So available carbohydrates will be determined by the total carbohydrates field minus the total dietary fiber field. So I will go ahead and calculate that. And now I have available carbohydrates populated for my ingredient here. While I'm here, I also want to talk a little bit about dietary fiber because that was used to calculate available carbohydrates. In Genesis, you'll see several dietary fiber related fields. And just to explain how those are used, the Dietary Fiber 2016 field here was included to accommodate the 2016 or the newer or current US label formats. FDA provided us with a specific definition for beneficial dietary fiber. So this Dietary Fiber 2016 field is intended for US 2016 labeling. So you need to populate this field when working with US labels and including dietary fiber information, which is mandatory. Outside of that US 2016 label, we have the total dietary fiber field. So that must be populated when you're reporting dietary fiber on other label formats. And it is also used to calculate the available carbohydrates So I must have total carbohydrates populated and total dietary fiber fields populated to arrive at an available carbohydrate value if I want the nutrient calculator to calculate this for me. You can certainly manually enter available carbohydrates value if you have that, but just be mindful of the differences of those definitions and the uses for those dietary fiber fields. So after I've entered the data, and then perhaps I've used the nutrient calculator to fill in additional fields, a good practice is to use the Check Data tool. So I click on Check Data button, and it gives me the Check Components screen. When you click on this, you'll see a set of calculations are being run to essentially help you review your work and flag for any numbers or values or comparisons that may not be in line with what's expected. This screen uses color coding to help identify some points that you might want to review and possibly modify. So here, green typically means a go-ahead, and red means that you may want to take a closer look at the numbers. Keep in mind here that the check data screen doesn't indicate compliance or non-compliance. It is just a means of feedback. And the default tolerance here for the difference is set to 5%. You can certainly change that. You can increase it, decrease it, set it to 0, and then that just affects the percent difference that's allowed here in each section. This first section here of the check data screen is the calories section. And the software is comparing an estimated calories value that's determined by 4497 and compares that with the calories that were entered for this ingredient. So again, the factors for protein, carbs, fat, and alcohol, if you have alcohol reported for your ingredient, are factored in to arrive at this estimated value. You can see here my percent difference is quite out of line. We have over 900% difference. So that would be cause to review the numbers that I entered. So I can go back to my nutrient screen. I'm going to minimize these nutrients again. I take a look at my data sheet and I see that, oh, the calories that I entered was 16. I should have entered 162. So identifies that a typo was made. I can correct that immediately. And then you may have noticed that now the calories section here is in green. So while it's not exact, and there is variance that is allowed when determining calories that we report for labeling. The percent difference is within the tolerance. So the green light is giving me the go-ahead. The fat section here is similar in that there is an estimated total fat and then compared with the total fat value that I entered. The estimated is using these fat components, the saturated, the polyunsaturated, and trans fat values, and comparing those with the total fat that I entered. Note that there is an interpret missing values as 0 box checked, and by default this will be checked. What that is indicating is even if fields are blank, it will interpret those as 0, and when that is checked, you'll notice that my percent difference falls outside of the tolerance and I'm getting these in red. What I do know about my ingredient is that I didn't enter mono and polyunsaturated fats. So it may be that I don't expect these components to add up because I didn't enter information here, and that's okay. Just knowing that, having that knowledge helps you move forward or not with this setting. If you are planning to report mono and polyunsaturated fats, if you need to support claims or something where you do need that information, or again, if you got that information from your supplier, it's best practice to enter those amount of detail. But here, I'm not reporting these on my label, and I'm going to move ahead knowing that I'm okay with the total fat not being in line with the fat that I entered. That is, the data makes sense to me, and I'm okay with that. Then we have the weight section. So the components that make up the weight of an ingredient are listed here. And again, Genesis is coming up with an estimated weight and comparing that to the weight that I entered. I entered my ingredient per 100 grams. Based on the components, protein, carbs, fat, alcohol, water, and ash, it's only arriving at 35 grams. So Ideally, I would want these numbers to add up, but again, I do need to have more detail, especially water could be a very significant component of this ingredient. If it's any kind of moisture containing, then I'd want to make sure that I populate the water field. But again, it's good practice if you have any or all of this data to populate these fields. Another note on this is if I plan to make any moisture adjustment to my recipes, when I use these ingredients in my recipes, then it's critical that I need to have the water information populated. And here, the field for water in Genesis is referring to the moisture content of the ingredient. So it's often reported as moisture on a spec sheet. So to correct this section, or to just address it, I'm going to show all nutrients again. And I'll just scroll down to my nutrients here, and I can populate the water or moisture information, and I'll populate the ash fields. And then again, you may have noticed that the weight section of this report turns to green because my estimated and my entered weights match exactly. And then this lower section, it refers to carbohydrates and available carbs as determined by carbohydrates minus dietary fiber. So again, that's showing in green, and I feel good about the ingredient information I've entered. So again, just another way to double check that your data entry is as correct or reviewed as possible. So then we move on to the yields and measures section of this ingredient. And I've entered all the nutrient data that I have. Again, it was reported per 100 grams, which may not be as useful to me when I go to use this ingredient in my recipes. I might want to add volume equivalents or other household measures here. And so with the units or with the yields and measures tab, I can go to edit measures and then add. So this is going to allow me to add additional units to give some context to this ingredient. I can enter a quantity and then choose from this drop-down list. These are preset units in Genesis. I'm going to choose 1 cup equals 240 grams and click OK and OK again. And you can see that it adds that unit to my list of available measures when I go to use this ingredient in a recipe. I may want to add another. So here I'll add maybe a non-standard unit, like a bottle. And I know that that one bottle, one full, weighs 355 grams. So I'll add that to my options. So just a note here on these units of measure, 1 cup is a standard. We use a standard, refer to that as a standard unit of measure. So we have conversions available from tablespoons, teaspoons, cups, fluid ounces, liters. In Genesis, you only need to enter 1 equivalent for a standard unit of measure. So I just enter 1 cup, and for this ingredient, it will open up other standard units like tablespoon, fluid ounce, liter, milliliters. For the bottle, that's not necessarily a standard unit of measure. Bottles come in all different sizes, so 1 bottle may not mean the same thing in all cases. So here, it would be a good practice if I choose to use kind of a non-standard unit like 1 bottle, to also include some kind of fluid ounce or other standard unit of measure, just to give this context. Here, if I know 1 cup is 240 grams and I have 1 bottle at 355 grams, then I know my bottle is probably around a 12 ounce bottle size, 12 fluid ounce bottle. You can also add cost information with Genesis. So the cost tab just allows you to enter any cost reference. It doesn't use a currency indicator, it's just generic. So for, I would assume mine is working in dollars. So I might have cost per 1 pound that I could choose as my cost. But also notice, because I did add those volume measures to my yields and measures area, this ingredient now also has volume measure equivalents available in my cost section as well. And then we have groups. We use groups as a way to categorize ingredients and recipes and files. So the Escher software includes a list of groups, including characteristics and database sections, and then food groups. So the characteristics you can see are dairy-free, gluten-free, kosher, those type of characteristics of foods. The databases are the collections that ship with the software. And then we have food groups. So you can assign multiple or assign an ingredient to multiple food groups as needed. You can also add your own groups. So think about the workflow, what might be helpful in a way to categorize or to organize your files. You might create groups in Genesis that address the manufacturing process or your review processing. So you might have like a QA group, a regulatory group, a marketing group, and be able to assign ingredients or recipes to those groups as they make their way through preparation and processing. So we have a separate webinar that discusses groups, and we have blogs, but there's really a lot of flexibility with the groups to design it as you need. And then we have the attributes. That's a way to track certain characteristics of your ingredients and your recipes. The software is populated with one attribute, the bioengineered attribute, and you can add as many new attributes as you need. The idea here is to mark the ingredient with the corresponding attributes. And the attributes have a couple options for definitions. One might be that all ingredients are required to be marked with a certain attribute in order for the recipe to qualify as that attribute. So it carries forward from ingredient to the recipe level. Another rule is that only one of the ingredients contained in a recipe need to be marked with the qualifying attribute in order for the recipe to qualify there. So bioengineered is set up that if one ingredient is marked with bioengineered, then the recipe will be flagged as bioengineered. And you can see the green check mark would be, yes, it qualifies for this bioengineered as defined. The red slash circle would indicate no, it doesn't, and the question marks are an unknown. And then there's also a spot for documentation. So yes or no, either way, you may want to attach a certificate or any kind of verifying documentation that an ingredient does or does not qualify for a certain attribute, like bioengineered. Here, the no artificial color is an example where all of my ingredients in my recipe would need to be marked with the no artificial color attribute in order for my recipe to qualify for that attribute as well. And we also have the ingredient statement and allergens fields available in Genesis. So with the ingredient statement feature, you'll see a couple of fields here. One is the ingredient statement name, and that is the field that is to be used as for the common or usual name that will appear in your ingredient statement on your packaging. The sub-ingredients field here is to be used if you have subcomponents of this ingredient. So if your primary ingredient here is made up of several subcomponents, you can list the common and usual name here in the ingredient statement name, and then you can list parenthetical information in the sub-ingredients area. And to edit those, just click on the edit button. It opens this copy of the ingredient statement field, and then you could apply. Again, I'm just going to give a non-compliant name, but I could type in my ingredient statement name here and then list any of the information that I would want as my sub-ingredients. And again, you would want these to be compliant. Note here that if you are using the sub-ingredients field, you do need to type in the parentheses characters. So make sure that you include those as well. We'll just give that a spicy name and click OK to save those. So I've had, if you've used a certain phrase or name before, then you can either choose to select from what is available, or you could create a new instance. Selecting the one that is already there is helpful in that if you use the same ingredient statement name, this common and usual name for several different ingredients, the Genesis can combine those later on. They can merge those in your ingredient statement name based on the weight of each occurrence of that common or usual name. So you do want to be mindful of how you apply those, but if it's appropriate to say you have 3 different types of butter, but they would all be listed as butter on your ingredient statement and could be combined, then you could choose to name those all the same. And then here the select button in the ingredient statement area shows you the list of the names that come populated with Genesis. So a note here, so when we provide ingredients in the Escher database, those that ship with the software, we will include an alternate name or that ingredient statement name, the common and usual name where we can. Please note that this is just a suggestion and not necessarily the end-all be-all compliant name that you need to have in your ingredient statement. When we go, we use English in US and in Canada, but we don't always use the same phrasing. It's not always appropriate to use the same term or phrase in the US as it is in Canada. So you want to be mindful of the English version of the name in the ingredient statement. And then you can see here that some translations are available where we've been able to provide those. But for every recipe, every ingredient statement that you create in Genesis, you want to review that and make sure that it's appropriate and compliant for your products. And then allergens. We have the allergens indicators here in Genesis, and you will note that all of these are marked as containing all of the allergens. This is intentional and it errs on the side of caution. What we need you to do, again, with the allergen statement, like the ingredient statement, is to review that each allergen that is marked for your ingredient is appropriate and compliant and correct. There is a button here, the Clear All Allergens button, that makes it easy for you to clear these all out, and then you could go through and mark those that might be appropriate. And then again, the allergens that you mark for your ingredient will carry forward to the recipes. We have attachments available. So if you choose to include the documentation that supports that ingredient, or say you have specific notes for that, you could choose to include attachments for this ingredient record. It might be lab analysis or just certain corrections or discussions, conversations that need to be kept with this ingredient record. So that's the way to attach. You can drag and drop files here or click on browse and browse your computer to find the file. And then we have the designations area. So designations are available to help indicate qualities of ingredients and foods that must be monitored for certain countries' labeling regulations. And you can see here the available designations of is sugar, is sweetener, is fat. Is sugar has already been in use for Canada labeling purposes for a while, but this is now used for both Canadian and Mexico ingredient statements to help identify sugars-based or added sugars ingredients. So checking this box here will help Genesis recognize that the sugars, that this is sugar or an added or sugars-based ingredient, and will group those in the ingredient statements for Mexico or Canada. The is sweetener designation is used for non-sugar sweeteners for Mexico labeling. So using this designation will result in the front of pack warning statement of contained sweeteners when working with the Mexico labeling module. The is fat designation here is also used for Mexico front of pack labeling, and that's used to indicate ingredients that are added oils or are added fats. So again, checking this designation coupled with the fat content contained by the ingredient will trigger front of pack warning seals if corresponding thresholds are exceeded. We talk a bit more about that in our recent Mexico labeling webinar. So again, with these settings, you want to review and apply the proper designations that are appropriate to the definitions of the country's regulations. And then here you'll see the notes fields for the ingredient record. So these can be used, maybe for your internal documentation, or if you want to include notes that apply or appear on some of the reports that you send externally or to those outside of your company. To help keep these straight, these notes, you'll see there's 3 notes fields available. And to keep those straight, if you click on the title of the notes field, it takes you to the My Preferences section. So here you could rename the title here of perhaps internal notes, or maybe one external, whatever is appropriate or makes sense to your organization. And then you can see it changes the titles there. Just note that if you do use these for internal and external purposes, make sure that everyone sets their My Preferences to the same. So you're all using maybe the first notes field for your internal notes, and then the second one for external notes. So now I've added my incredible ingredient and I'm going to save it. And I want to be able to find this ingredient in Genesis. So let me talk a little bit about search methods and what we can use to find our ingredients and help sort those. So to open an existing ingredient, I can go to File, Open Ingredient, or I can just use the Open Ingredient option here. It brings up the search list just like I was working with my supplier searches. And maybe I choose to search by my supplier, or excuse me, my ingredient code. Let's see if I got this right. So here I can search by my specific user code and it pulls up my incredible ingredient. Or I could search by name. So I'll show you how that looks if I just type in part of the name. When I type in just incredible, you can see that my incredible ingredient here is showing up at the top of the list. And then it is also appearing in a different color green than those items that ship with the software in the Escher database. So a little bit darker green for my user added ingredients. And then you can also see a few things here about the other columns here on the screen. So I entered my user code, so that's appearing here. Again, I could enter a user code for Escher ingredients. That is a field that can be edited, so I could apply that there. But notice here that the Escher code column is appearing for the Escher database ingredients, but there is not an Escher code shown for ingredients that I add to my software. So just keep that in mind. It's another way to know if you're working with an ingredient from the Escher database or if you're working with an ingredient that you've added to your Genesis. If there's no Escher code, that's an indication that you or someone at your organization added that. We have government code, and that would occur for, again, like USDA or Health Canada items. And then again, the product supplier, depending on the amount of information that you populated here. In this screen, you can choose the columns that you want to see, or that if you want to omit any of these. So just right click in this screen here and you'll see the list of columns available, and you can choose to show those or omit those. Additional searches that you could perform, like if I can never remember how to spell broccoli, I could do a partial word search. So I do that, and the software is showing me anything that matches my search. So any names or the product and supplier names that have BROC in the names. So if you're not finding something but think it's a common enough ingredient, maybe you spelled it wrong, or maybe you just want to try a different spelling and see if there's a broader way to search for that term, the more detail that you include, the more narrowed down the search will be. The order of the words doesn't matter. So if I type in table salt, I get a certain set of search results. If I type in salt table, because I'm used to that order of naming conventions, you'll see here that I get the same search results. But again, if I just type in salt, then I'm going to get every item that does include the name salt or the word salt in the name. So again, just to keep in mind what could help narrow down searches as you use the software more. Here I do want to talk about the headers, again, ingredient name, the codes. You can sort by just clicking on the header name. So sometimes I'll use that if I want to look for all my USDA ingredients together and see how many are showing up. That's an easy way to just sort that column. And then again, keep in mind singular versus plural. So if I type in a singular word like cherry, I'm going to get one set of search results. If I type in plural cherries, then I might get a different set, just depending on how ingredients were entered or how you enter those. And so again, if you do a partial name, then it encompasses all of those, includes both singular and plural. So talked about adding and searching. And so let me just jump into a little bit of the other features in the software that I want to mention because it really does tie into how you can work with Genesis and your ingredients. One is the nutrients to view. And so from this home tab in Genesis, you'll see the nutrients to view button. And what this is Genesis comes with a predetermined set of, several sets of determined nutrient sets here. You can see we have basic sets, a few that are a little more specific, and then several of the label related sets of nutrients. We have old and new labels, so you'll see US 1990 and 2016. Canadians, both the old and new, Mexico old and new. So the mandatory sets for the labels would be those that are required for labeling, and then you'll also see the label set that includes all, so those would include all of the nutrients that are allowed on that label. And so be mindful when you're working with ingredients, it might be helpful to select the label set that you're working with when you want to double check that you have entered all of the nutrients that are required for or that are desired for the label that you're needing to create. And then here again with the nutrients to view, you can create as many new sets of nutrients to view as you would like. So to do that, the top section here is modify, and this will show you those nutrients that are selected already in the set that you have selected. Go to edit, and you'll see here the selected nutrients based on that set that you have selected, and then the available, all the other additional nutrients in Genesis that you could choose to use or display on reports. This does not affect the label nutrients, but this is a way to select the nutrients that you want to see on that ingredient entry screen, as well as report on some of the reports available. So you can just double click on any of the nutrients to send them over, or use the arrows here. When you have selected them, you can reorder, rearrange nutrients by using these up and down arrows, or just clicking and dragging the nutrient within its section. You can also show or not show the categories. So if you don't want to see, that some are basic nutrients or vitamins or minerals, you can turn that off, or you can choose to show the categories here. So here you create your own custom set of nutrients to view, and then from here you would choose Save As, and then give it a meaningful name. So again, if you're working on a certain project and you need a certain set of nutrients, create a nutrients to view set for that. Or if you know a certain supplier always provides you with the same set of nutrients, you might create a nutrients to view set that gives you all those nutrients that are always reported from that certain supplier. So again, click on Save As, give it a meaningful name. I'm not going to do that because I already have several sets available. But as you see here in Nutrients to View, those that you do add appear at the top of the list. So these are all the user added Nutrients to View sets, followed by the sets that are shipped with Genesis. And then we have a few ways to export the ingredient record. So if I just open up again my incredible ingredient. When you open the ingredient record, you'll see this export button. And here you could choose to export this as a file. What that's going to do is format it in an EXL file, which is an Escher formatted file. And I could export this ingredient and email it to a colleague, send it as an attachment as the file. They could then import that into their copy of Genesis. So that's the EXL file format that would provide that. With the ingredient record, we also have a 100-gram spec sheet report, or a spec sheet report. And if I click on this, you'll see that it's a form that pulls in the information that I've already entered for this ingredient, as well as includes a couple more fields that I can populate. So it's bringing in my ingredient name, the information per 100 grams, also those yields or those units of measure that I added, and then additional fields. I can fill in a date. I can date this report if I choose. And then I could also include additional comments or a signature line and a signature date. So if I want this to serve as my spec sheet to send out to customers, I could populate those fields with the information that I want. And here I'll just go to, you could print it or print to a PDF. So again, that's capturing an electronic copy that you could share with others. And I'll just show you the print preview here. So it's giving me a nice clean format of this ingredient report that I could share with others. One other item, we do receive questions on this, so I wanted to be sure we talked about it in ingredients. So I showed you the single ingredient way of entering information. Genesis also includes a composite ingredient feature. So with that, if you go to New and then Composite Ingredient, this is a way to create an ingredient from several others. So if I have several similar ingredients that I want to average or create an ingredient that represents the average of those three, then this could be a way to use the ingredient or the composite ingredient feature to create an averaged item. So I'm just going to create a corporate hamburger bun here. These fields still apply. The common and usual, or the user code fields, could be populated. What this is doing is automatically bringing in or creating a 100-gram version of this ingredient. So what I would do is I've already entered in my 3 different ingredients that I want to combine. So I have 3 different regional hamburger buns that I want to bring into this one and create a composite ingredient. So here, the composite ingredient, I bring in these 3 already created ingredients. It's bringing them in equal amounts to total 100 grams. And then I have this averaged item. Here I could edit this ingredient with those fields that we just covered for the single ingredient items. So I could add more information. I could add yields and measures. So again, if I wanted to say enter a weight for 1 each, 1 bun, I could do that here. And then again, there's a spreadsheet report is another way of viewing this data. So each is contributing 1/3 in this case because I brought in 3 items to the total weight. And then here it's giving me the total nutritional information for this ingredient, this composite ingredient. And then it also shows me the breakdown contributed by each individual that I've averaged. Adding the composite ingredient then just acts like a single ingredient, and then in that you can bring it into a recipe just like you would any other ingredients. So that is what we have to cover today in the software so far. I'm going to switch it back to the slides, and I do want to just share one more item with you, which is the audit trail. And the audit trail is in Genesis is a setting that when enabled, it allows you to record a date stamp and user information, as well as a comment box to enter notes each time a save occurs. So this is a way to track any changes made by whomever in your organization and just keep a record of dates and who made any changes. Just a good idea if you have multiple people working with records to be able to trace those changes. By default, the audit trail is turned off. So if you need to have this enabled, you may need to talk to your account administrator for the desktop installations of Genesis. If you're running a cloud version, then contact Escher Tech Support at support@escher, and they can help you out there. So I know that was a lot of information to cover. Thanks for sticking with me. And at this time, I'm going to turn it back to Chris.
Nice job, Alicia. Thank you. So I just wanted to add that we do offer more comprehensive training than we can provide via webinar, and those are available. We have 2-day professional training, which covers more in depth some of the things we've talked about today. They also will get into helping with regulatory interpretations and even best practices in the industry. And then we also have a 1-day advanced training, which you can add on to that and attend for, again, just depending on your level of need and how comprehensive your workflow is or usage of Genesis. Those are excellent options for adding to training. We have a couple coming up in February and March. February 23rd and 24th, the 2-day, March 23rd and 24th for that as well. And then the 1-day advance is the day following those on February 25th and March 26th. Make sure you keep an eye on the training website, on our training page on the website. We do make additions to that. We may be adding a USDA training specific to USDA regulations in April. So just recommend keeping an eye out on that at all times for any additions. If you have questions regarding our training availability or wish to sign up for that, you can contact training@escher.com with any questions, and they can help guide you. We also post the training schedule at escher.com/news-events/training schedule. So we also added this contact page since all of you will be receiving a copy of this webinar. So just contact for sales support, which is sort of product and technical support, our consulting services for outsourcing any labeling or nutrition analysis needs, and then training as well. And those helpful resources for our webinars, our learning center, blog posts, and our e-newsletter are available too. So this is good to maybe put on your workbench or have available for a quick response to where's the best place to go in Escher organization for specific types of information as well. So this slide is added in the presentation for all of your convenience. With that, we'll conclude our webinar with a couple Q&A follow-ups that were common during the webinar. We've been diligently responding to those. As I mentioned earlier, if you did not get a response, we will address all the questions and follow up with you after the webinar. I'm going to start with some questions. The first one is can I edit an ingredient?
And yes, you can. So for ingredients that you've added, just open that ingredient record and you can make any changes that you need. Note that for Escher database ingredients, or those again that ship with the software, there are only certain fields that can be edited. And I'll just speak to this a little more in Genesis. So you can enter or you can edit fields like the user code or the groups, ingredient statement and allergens and a few others, but the name of the ingredient itself and the nutrient data you cannot change for those Escher database ingredients. And the reason for that is if you were able to edit nutrient data and then we shipped out a software update, it would overwrite your changes. So if you try to make a change within these fields, you can actually enter a number, but when you click out of that field or try to close the record or save it, you'll be prompted with a sorry, you can't do that message. So if you're working with an ingredient record from the Escher database, one approach you could choose is to make a copy of that. So when you open an ingredient in Genesis from the Escher database, you can choose File and Save As. And what this does is allow you do need to change the name. So give that a name that's meaningful to you. Save it, and then what that will do is allow you to make nutrient changes to this record. You can make changes to any of these fields. Note that one thing, or a couple things that it does retain the product and supplier that came with the original record, but now the Escher code and even the government code here are not reported because, again, if you made changes to the nutrient data, it would no longer reflect the initial or the original item. So just note that it's treated like a user added ingredient at that point, and you won't see an Escher code for it any longer. Thanks.
Great. And similar to that, a couple clients want to ask if you can delete an ingredient.
And yes, you can. Proceed with caution, but in Genesis, you can delete records. To do that, you would go to the main screen here. In the database tab, you have some options, and one is modify. So we have a way to add some new things, but then there's another that is delete. So if I choose delete, then it asks me, do you want to delete a recipe and an ingredient or any of the other available items that you could have added? So there you would just choose ingredient and then choose from the list of ingredients. These are those that I've added, so I could choose to delete any of these. One thing it will flag you if I try and delete an ingredient but it's used in a recipe, then the software will warn me, hey, you're using that in a recipe, are you sure? And it may not allow me to delete an ingredient until I delete a recipe. But again, those are permanent changes, so just be mindful of deleting. You might want to create a group called archives and retire recipes or ingredients to an archive folder if that's a better way to address those.
Thank you. What if I need to track a nutrient not already in Genesis?
Sure. And so that, again, under this database tab and modify, you can add new items. So here's where you could add new groups if you wanted, and here this first tab is nutrients. So you could add a new nutrient or component. It's not limited to nutrients, so if there is a field that you need to report in Genesis or keep track of, just enter in, enter in this form. The abbreviated name would be, with the spreadsheet report, it's very narrow columns, so the abbreviated name can serve as a way to just identify that on some of those reports. And then the measure would be the unit that is appropriate. So if it's grams, milligrams, micrograms, or parts per million, or some other unit, enter that appropriately. And then the category just refers to, like I showed you with nutrients to view, breaks down the nutrients in different sections. So you could add, if one of these is appropriate, or just generically to your user defined section of nutrients and components.
Sounds great. I'm going to stop us here. We appreciate all of you for your attendance. We look forward to hopefully you joining us for future webinars, and we make them all available on our website, so keep an eye out for that. But our marketing team also does a great job of sending notifications with that through newsletters and emails. Of course, contact us with any questions or follow-ups. We will be sending out a copy of the slideshow for the webinar and a video recording. It takes us just a little bit of time to put that together, but that will be sent out to all attendees, whether or not you're able to attend. So all us people that signed up for the webinar. Thank you, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future. Thank you.